There is a profound silence that settles over the hills of Arcetri, just outside the bustling city of Florence. It is the kind of silence that feels heavy, laden with secrets and the weight of history. In the year 1638, inside a villa ironically named Il Gioiello, or the Jewel, an old man sat in this silence, surrounded by the darkness of his own failing eyes. He was the man who had expanded the universe, who had pulled back the curtain of the night sky to reveal the infinite, yet he now lived in a world shrinking day by day into an eternal shadow. This was Galileo Galilei, the prisoner of the stars, a man whose brilliant intuition was matched only by the tragic irony of his final years. Before we walk the corridors of his mind, I invite you to settle into your own quiet space, closing your eyes to the distractions of the day, just as Galileo was forced to close his to the world. Long before he was the giant of science we know today, Galileo was a young man torn between the call of the spirit and the demands of the earth. In his youth, he had walked the stone halls of the Vallombrosa Abbey, wearing the robes of a novice. He possessed a deep, burning desire to join the priesthood, to lose himself in the quiet contemplation of God. But the world, personified by his father Vincenzo, had other plans. Vincenzo was a musician and a theorist, a man of practical dissonance who forcibly removed his son from the abbey, stripping him of his robes and pushing him toward the University of Pisa to study medicine. It was there, in the tension between his father's will and his own wandering mind, that the seeds of rebellion were sown. Vincenzo was not just a musician, he was an experimenter. He spent hours testing the tension of strings, proving that the ancient authorities like Pythagoras were wrong about how sound was created. Young Galileo watched this. He learned that truth was not found in dusty books or the words of long-dead philosophers, but in the physical world, in the vibration of a string, in the testing of reality. If you enjoy uncovering the hidden roots of history's greatest minds, please take a moment to like this video, helping us share these stories with others seeking rest. Galileo was a terrible medical student. He found the lectures dull, preferring to skip class to study geometry, the hidden language of God. He eventually left the university without a degree, a dropout with no clear future. Yet his mind was so sharp, his reputation as a polymath growing so rapidly, that by the age of 25, the dropout returned to Pisa, not as a student, but as the chair of mathematics. But beneath the academic robes lay a man burdened by earthly troubles. Following his father's death, Galileo was left with a crushing financial weight. He was responsible for the massive dowries of his sisters and the debts of his brother Michelangelo. This constant need for money fueled his ambition, driving him to seek patrons and fame with a ferocity that would eventually make him dangerous enemies. Then came the year 1609, and the invention that changed everything. The spyglass. It was a carnival toy, a curiosity from the north, but where others saw a trinket, Galileo saw a weapon of discovery. He ground his own lenses, achieving a magnification of 30 times, and turned his glass not toward the ships at sea, but toward the heavens. What he saw shattered the ancient crystal spheres of Aristotle. The moon was not a perfect, smooth pearl of divinity. It was a jagged, scarred rock, marred by craters and mountains, just like the earth. He looked to Jupiter and saw 4 small stars dancing around it. In a stroke of marketing genius born of his financial desperation, he named them the Medicean stars, gifting them to the Grand Duke of Tuscany. It worked. He secured his place as the court mathematician, rising high above his rivals. But as he climbed, the air grew thinner. He observed Venus and saw it moving through phases like the moon, a celestial ballet that was mathematically impossible if the sun revolved around the earth. The universe was not as the Church taught. As we delve deeper into the psyche of this genius, consider subscribing to the channel to ensure you never miss a journey into the past. Galileo was not a heretic at heart. He was a devout Catholic who believed he was saving the Church from a terrible error. He famously argued that the Bible teaches how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go. But his brilliance was tainted by arrogance. In his great work, The Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems, he made a fatal mistake. He placed the arguments of his old friend, Pope Urban VIII, into the mouth of a character named Simplicio, the simpleton. The Pope, once his protector, felt the sting of betrayal. The Inquisition was summoned. The old man was dragged to Rome, threatened with torture, and forced to kneel. He abjured his life's work, spitting out the lie that the earth stood still. He was sentenced to house arrest, confined to his villa in Arcetri. Here the story turns inward. His greatest comfort was not the stars, but his daughter, Virginia, known as Sister Maria Celeste. Though he had deemed her unmarriageable and placed her in a convent, she was the light of his life. She sent him herbal remedies for his hernias and his melancholy, acting as his apothecary and his scribe. If you find peace in these quiet histories, leave a comment below sharing which figure you would like to visit next in your dreams. In his final years, the great watcher went blind. The man who had seen the rings of Saturn and the spots on the sun was plunged into total darkness. Yet, even blind and broken, he was defiant. He dictated his final masterpiece, Two New Sciences, smuggling the manuscript to Holland to escape the censors. He worked until the very end, a mind burning bright in a failing body. A century after his death, when his body was moved to a grand tomb, admirers cut off 3 of his fingers as relics. Today, his middle finger sits in a glass egg in a museum in Florence. It stands upright, frozen in time, pointing eternally toward Rome, a final, silent gesture from the man who refused to stop seeing the truth. And so, we leave Galileo in the quiet dark of his villa, the blind watchman who saw more than any of us, resting at last amongst the stars he loved so dearly. The story of the man who would one day unlock the secrets of the heavens begins not with a telescope, but with a song. Before there were stars, there was the lute. Imagine, if you will, the dimly lit study of a home in Pisa in the late 16th century. The air is filled with the scent of old parchment and the rhythmic, resonant thrumming of strings. A young Galileo Galilei sits quietly, watching his father, Vincenzo. Vincenzo was a musician, but he was also a rebel in his own quiet way. He did not simply accept the musical theories passed down by the ancients. He tested them. He stretched sheep-gut strings across wooden bridges, hanging weights from them to see how tension changed the pitch. Young Galileo watched this interplay of mathematics and melody. He learned, in the quiet of that room, that authority, even the authority of the great Pythagoras, could be wrong if the physical world whispered a different truth. It was a lesson that would define his life, a seed planted deep in his mind that would one day grow into a forest of trouble and glory. If you are finding a sense of calm in this journey into the past, I invite you to subscribe to the channel, so we may continue to explore these quiet histories together. But the path to the stars was not a straight line. It was a winding road of duty and desperation. As a young man, Galileo felt a pull not toward the laboratory, but toward the cloister. He spent time as a novice at the Vallombrosa Abbey, surrounded by the chanting of monks and the smell of incense. He found peace there, a deep, resonant silence that called to his soul. He desired to join the priesthood, to dedicate his life to the spiritual architecture of God. But his father, Vincenzo, had other plans. He stormed into the abbey, a man of practical burdens, and removed his son. He marched Galileo to the University of Pisa and enrolled him in medical school. Vincenzo knew the sting of poverty, and he wanted his son to be a doctor, a profession of gold and stability. Yet, the young Galileo was a terrible medical student. While his peers dissected bodies, he found himself drawn to the geometry of the lecture halls, the way light fell through the windows, the swing of a chandelier in the cathedral. Legend tells us he used his own pulse to time the swaying lamp, realizing that the time of the swing remained the same regardless of how wide the arc. This was the pendulum, the heartbeat of time itself. He eventually left the university without a degree, a dropout with a mind that was already outgrowing the world he lived in. It is often forgotten that the great scientist was driven as much by the need for money as by the thirst for truth. When his father died, the burden of the family fell squarely on Galileo's shoulders. He was responsible for the dowries of his sisters and the debts of his brother Michelangelo, a musician who squandered money he did not have. Galileo was perpetually chasing patrons, teaching students, and inventing gadgets just to keep the creditors at bay. If you're enjoying this slow unraveling of history, please take a moment to like this video, helping us guide others to this place of rest. The turning point came in 1609. Rumours arrived from the north, from the misty canals of Holland, of a spyglass that could make distant ships appear close. Galileo did not invent this device, but he perfected it. He retreated to his workshop, his hands stained with grinding paste, working the glass with an obsessive focus. He increased the magnification to 30 times. And then he did something no one else had thought to do. He stopped looking at the horizon and tilted the tube upward into the velvet darkness of the night sky. What he saw shattered the crystalline spheres of the ancients. The moon was not a perfect smooth pearl as Aristotle had claimed. It was a rugged world, scarred with craters, towering mountains, and deep, shadowed valleys. It was a place of earth and stone floating in the void. He saw the Milky Way, not as a cloud, but as a dense river of countless stars. And then he saw Jupiter. Dancing around the giant planet were 4 tiny points of light. They moved, they orbited, they proved, once and for all, that not everything in the universe circled the Earth. In a stroke of political genius, or perhaps desperation, he named these moons the Medicean stars, after the Grand Duke of Tuscany, Cosimo de' Medici. It was a gift written in light, a flatterer's masterstroke that secured him a position as the court mathematician. He had won his financial freedom, but he had also stepped onto a stage that would become his scaffold. As we gaze up at these ancient lights, feel free to leave a comment below, sharing which star or planet you have always wished to see through such a glass. But beneath the triumph lay a complex human struggle. Galileo was not an atheist trying to tear down the church. He was a devout Catholic who wanted to save it from error. He believed that the Bible taught us how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go. He felt a desperate urgency to reconcile his faith with the mathematical language of the universe. This internal conflict was mirrored in his most intimate relationship, the bond with his eldest daughter Virginia. Because she was illegitimate, Galileo deemed her unmarriageable and placed her in a convent at a young age, where she took the name Sister Maria Celeste. Despite the walls between them, they were souls intertwined. She was his apothecary, sending him herbal remedies for his hernias and palpitations. She was his scribe, copying his letters. And she was his confessor, the one person who understood the weight of his genius and his guilt. While he charted the cold, vast orbits of the planets, she anchored him to the earth with warm loaves of bread and letters of unwavering love. His downfall, when it came, was born of his own brilliance and arrogance. In 1632, he published the Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems. It was meant to be a balanced discussion, but Galileo could not help himself. He placed the arguments of the Pope's former friend, Urban VIII, into the mouth of a character named Simplicio, or the Simpleton. It was a public humiliation the Pope could not forgive. The machinery of the Inquisition began to turn. Galileo was summoned to Rome. He was an old man now, nearly 70, plagued by arthritis and fear. He did not stand defiant in a blaze of glory. He was tired. Under the threat of torture, he knelt and recanted. He admitted that his life's work was a vain ambition. As he rose from his knees, legend whispers that he muttered, "E per si muove," and yet it moves. Whether he said it or not, the truth remained. The earth continued to spin, regardless of the decrees of men. If this story is helping you find a quiet space for your mind, consider sharing it with a friend who might also need a moment of peace. His sentence was house arrest. He was confined to his villa, Il Gioiello, the Jewel, in the hills of Arcetri, just outside Florence. It was a gilded cage. He could hear the bells of the convent where his daughter lived, but he would never see her again. She died shortly after his return, a loss that broke something inside him that no lens could repair. In his final years, the great watcher went blind. The man who had seen the rings of Saturn and the spots on the sun was plunged into total darkness. Yet, even blind and broken, he was defiant. He dictated his final masterpiece, two new sciences, smuggling the manuscript to Holland to escape the censors. He worked until the very end, a mind burning bright in a failing body. A century after his death, when his body was moved to a grand tomb, admirers cut off 3 of his fingers as relics. Today, his middle finger sits in a glass egg in a museum in Florence. It stands upright, frozen in time, pointing eternally toward Rome, a final silent gesture from the man who refused to stop seeing the truth. And so we leave Galileo in the quiet dark of his villa, the blind watchman who saw more than any of us, resting at last amongst the stars he loved so dearly. The night sky is often thought of as a place of silence. We imagine the stars hanging in a void of perfect quiet stillness, far removed from the noise of our daily lives. But for the man who would eventually unlock the secrets of the heavens, the universe was never silent. It was a symphony of tension, a mathematical song waiting to be heard. Before he was the prisoner of the stars, before he was the blind old man in the villa, Galileo Galilei was a son bearing the heavy weight of expectation. His story does not begin with a telescope pointed at the moon, but with the vibration of a lute string in a crowded home in Pisa. Allow yourself to settle into the darkness of your own room now, just as he once settled into the darkness of the Tuscan night. Close your eyes and let the worries of your day dissolve, leaving only the calm rhythm of the past. If you find peace in these stories of history's great minds, do take a moment to subscribe, so we may continue this journey through time together. Galileo was born into a world of friction. His father, Vincenzo, was a musician and a theorist, a man who spent his days testing the tension of strings to challenge the ancient laws of harmony. Vincenzo was a rebel in his own right, teaching his son that authority, even the authority of the great Pythagoras, could be dismantled by simple physical experimentation. Young Galileo watched his father stretch gut strings across wooden bridges, adding weights, listening to the pitch change. He learned early on that the truth was not written in old books, but hidden in the physical world, waiting to be measured. Yet there was a burden in this bloodline. Vincenzo was a man of brilliance but little coin, and he looked upon his eldest son not just as a prodigy, but as a financial saviour. When Galileo, feeling the pull of the divine, entered the Vallombrosa Abbey as a novice, dreaming of a quiet life as a monk, his father was furious. There was no money in prayer. Vincenzo stormed the abbey, citing an eye infection as an excuse, and dragged the boy back to the secular world, forcing him into the medical school at the University of Pisa. He wanted a doctor in the family, a man of prestige and salary. But the blood of the rebel ran too thick in Galileo's veins. He sat in the medical lectures, bored and restless, his mind wandering from the anatomy of the body to the geometry of the chandeliers swaying above him in the cathedral. He eventually abandoned medicine, leaving without a degree, a decision that haunted the family's fortunes. But the true weight of his lineage settled upon him only after his father's death. Suddenly, at the age of 27, Galileo became the patriarch. The burden of blood was no longer metaphoric. It was a crushing reality of dowries and debts. He was legally responsible for marrying off his sisters, requiring massive sums of gold he did not have, and supporting his brother Michelangelo, a talented but irresponsible musician who drained Galileo's purse at every turn. This desperation is the often overlooked engine of his genius. We like to imagine science is driven purely by curiosity, but for Galileo, it was also driven by the terrifying need for income. He took students, he sold compasses, and he hustled for patronage. If you're enjoying this immersion into the hidden struggles of history, please gently press the like button, helping us share these quiet truths with others. It was this financial panic that sharpened his mind when news arrived in 1609 of a Dutch invention, a spyglass, that could make distant ships appear close. Galileo did not sleep. He saw not just a toy but a weapon of perception, and, more importantly, a product. He ground his own lenses, his hands stained with glass dust, pushing the magnification to 30 times the power of the original. When he finally turned his tube to the sky, the universe shattered. He saw the moon, not as the perfect smooth pearl described by Aristotle, but as a jagged, scarred rock filled with mountains and craters much like Earth. He saw the Milky Way not as a cloud, but as a dense river of individual stars. And, in a stroke of political brilliance born of his financial burden, he discovered 4 moons orbiting Jupiter. He quickly named them the Medicean stars, gifting them to the Grand Duke of Tuscany. It was a cosmic bribe, a way to secure a position at court and pay off the debts that kept him awake at night. But as his fame grew, so did his arrogance. There was a fire in him, a polemical wit that could not suffer fools. He began to write in Italian, the language of the people, rather than Latin, the language of the scholars. He wanted the world to see what he saw. He observed Venus moving through phases like the moon, a celestial dance that was physically impossible if the sun orbited the earth. The heavens were screaming out the truth of Copernicus, and Galileo felt it was his divine duty to save the Church from the error of ignoring it. He believed, with a devout and stubborn heart, that the Bible taught how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go. But in his zeal, he made a fatal miscalculation. He wrote a dialogue comparing the world's systems, and in it he placed the arguments of his old friend Pope Urban VIII into the mouth of a character named Simplicio. The simpleton. It was a stinging insult, perceived or intended, that turned his powerful protector into his prosecutor. If you are listening, feeling the weight of his choices, consider leaving a comment below. Tell us if you believe his pride was his tragic flaw or his greatest strength. The tragedy of Galileo's later years was not just the trial, but the isolation. Yet, in that isolation, there was a hidden light. While he is known as the father of modern science, his most tender role was that of a father to his illegitimate daughter Virginia. Because she was born out of wedlock, Galileo deemed her unmarriageable, placing her in a convent where she became Sister Maria Celeste. She became the keeper of his soul. While he fought giants in Rome, she fought the cold and hunger of the convent, sending him herbal remedies for his hernia and his melancholy. She copied his letters. She prayed for his soul. She was the one who bore the burden of his blood with grace. When the Inquisition finally silenced him, forcing him to his knees to recant the movement of the earth, it was her letters that kept him from crumbling entirely. He was sentenced to house arrest, confined to his villa, Il Gioiello, the jewel in the hills of Arcetri. But the final blow was not the imprisonment. It was the news, shortly after his return, that Sister Maria Celeste had died of dysentery. The daughter who had carried his emotional debts was gone, broken, and soon after completely blind. The old man sat in the dark. The eyes that had seen the rings of Saturn were now useless, yet the defiance remained. It dictated his final work in the shadows, smuggling the ideas out to Holland, refusing to let the truth die with him. A century later, admirers would disturb his grave to cut off his fingers as relics, a grotesque tribute to the hand that pulled back the curtain of the night. But in those quiet final nights in Arcetri, there were no relics, only the silence he had fought so hard to fill. The night sky has always been a mirror, reflecting not just the light of distant suns, but the deepest questions of the human spirit. Before we can understand the silence that eventually fell upon the villa in Arcetri, we must understand the noise that preceded it. We must go back to a time when the heavens were considered perfect, unblemished spheres of crystal, rotating in a divine harmony that no mortal dared to question. Tonight, we drift into the life of a man who dared to look closer, a man who ground glass into a key that unlocked the universe, only to find himself locked away by the world he sought to enlighten. Long before he was the prisoner of the stars, Galileo Galilei was a young boy in the quiet stone corridors of the Vallombrosa Abbey. The air there smelled of beeswax and old parchment, a sensory blanket that comforted him. In those early years, he did not dream of equations or orbits. He dreamed of the cloth, He felt a profound pull toward the priesthood, a desire to dissolve his identity into the rhythmic chanting of the monks. It was a life of safety, of predictable tides. But his father, Vincenzo, would not have it. Vincenzo was a man of music, a theorist who understood that harmony was not magic, it was math. He forcibly removed his son from the abbey, stripping him of the robes he coveted and thrusting him into the chaotic, disease-ridden world of medical school at the University of Pisa. It is here, in the tension between a father's will and a son's nature, that the spark was struck. Vincenzo was not a wealthy man, but he was a revolutionary in his own right. He spent his evenings experimenting with lute strings, stretching gut and wire to different tensions, proving that the pitch produced was directly related to the weight applied. Young Galileo watched this. He saw his father challenge the ancient authority of Pythagoras, not with words, but with physical testing. He learned that authority could be wrong, but nature never lied. If you enjoy uncovering the hidden threads of history like this, you might consider subscribing as we unravel more of these lives together in the quiet of the night. Galileo was a terrible medical student. While his peers memorized anatomy, he skipped lectures to listen to the whispers of geometry. He left without a degree, a dropout with a reputation for brilliance, and a pockets full of nothing. The burden of being the eldest son weighed heavily on him. When Vincenzo died, the financial roof collapsed. Galileo inherited not wealth but debt. He was responsible for the dowries of his sister's massive sums of money he did not have, and he had to support his brother, Michelangelo, a musician who had inherited their father's talent but none of his discipline. This crushing need for money is often forgotten in the story of his genius. It was the engine that drove him. He needed a position. He needed a tenure. He needed a miracle. That miracle arrived in 1609. Carried on a whisper from Holland, rumours circulated of a spyglass, a novelty toy that could make distant ships appear close. Most men saw a military tool, a way to see the enemy before they arrived. Galileo saw something else. He saw a bridge to the invisible. He did not simply buy one, he built one. Manic and possessed, he locked himself away, grinding his own lenses with a mixture of obsession and desperation. The sound of sand against glass became the rhythm of his days. He taught himself to polish the curvature to a precision no one else could match, increasing the magnification to 30 times the power of the naked eye. When he finally lifted his creation, which he would come to call the telescope, he did not look at ships on the horizon. He tilted the tube upward. Imagine that moment. For thousands of years, humanity believed the moon was a perfect, smooth pearl, a divine object untouched by the decay of Earth. Through the Dutch glass, Galileo saw the shock of reality. He saw jagged mountains. He saw deep, shadowy craters. He saw a world of rock and ruin, scarred and imperfect, just like the Earth. It was a revelation that shattered the crystalline spheres of Aristotle. If the moon was just a rock, what was the Earth? And if the Earth was just a planet, were we truly the center of everything? He did not stop there. He turned his gaze toward Jupiter and saw 4 bright stars dancing around the giant planet. They moved night after night, clearly orbiting Jupiter, not the Earth. This was impossible in the old worldview, where everything circled humanity. With a stroke of political genius, born of his desperate need for money, he named them the Medicean stars, gifting them to the Grand Duke of Tuscany. It was a celestial flattery that worked. He secured his position as the court mathematician, rising from a debt-ridden dropout to the most famous philosopher in Italy. If you find peace in these stories of the night sky, taking a moment to like this episode helps us keep the lantern lit for others seeking rest. But the telescope revealed more than just moons. It revealed the truth of Venus. Galileo observed that Venus went through phases, waxing and waning just like the moon. This was the smoking gun. For Venus to have a full set of phases, it had to be circling the sun, not the Earth. The math was undeniable. The visual proof was absolute, and yet truth is a dangerous gift to give to a world that relies on certainty. Galileo was not an atheist trying to tear down the church. He was a devout Catholic who believed that the Bible taught how to go to heaven. not how the heavens go. He believed that by revealing the true architecture of God's creation, he was saving the church from a terrible error. But he was also proud. He was caustic. He had the sharp tongue of a man who knows he is the smartest person in the room and cannot hide his disdain for those who refuse to see. This arrogance would be his undoing. When he published his great work, the Dialogue concerning the two chief world systems, he made a fatal mistake. He took the arguments of his old friend, Pope Urban VIII's arguments about the divine omnipotence of God, and placed them in the mouth of a character named Simplicio, the simpleton. The Pope, once his protector, felt the sting of betrayal. The political winds shifted. The Inquisition was summoned. The trial is the stuff of legend, but the aftermath is where the true human story lies. Galileo was forced to recant, to kneel and deny the motion of the earth, a humiliation that broke his spirit. He was sentenced to house arrest for the remainder of his life. He retreated to Il, the Jewel, a villa in Arcetri, nestled in the hills above Florence. Here the great observer began to lose his sight. The eyes that had pierced the veil of the cosmos were slowly consumed by darkness. Yet, in this shrinking world, he found a different kind of light. His eldest daughter, Virginia, whom he had placed in a convent because he deemed her unmarriageable, became his greatest comfort. She took the name Sister Maria Celeste. Through letters, she became his apothecary, his confidant, and his strength. She sent him candied citron and herbal remedies for his hernia and his melancholy. She took upon herself the penance he was too old to perform. There is a profound irony in his final years. The man who argued for a sun-centered universe was forced to live in the shadows. He was forbidden from publishing, yet he continued to work, dictating his final masterpiece, Two New Sciences in the Dark. He smuggled the manuscript out to Holland, the very place the spyglass had come from, ensuring that his ideas would outlive his captors. As you listen to the silence of your own room, consider the resilience of the human mind. Even when the world narrowed to the four walls of a villa, even when the light failed him, Galileo refused to stop thinking. A century after his death, when his body was moved to a grand tomb, admirers would cut off his finger as a relic, a grotesque tribute perhaps, but a testament to the power of the hand that had pointed the way. Now, the telescope is laid down, the glass is cold, the stars continue their silent, elliptical drift, indifferent to the arguments of men. The struggle of the debt-ridden son, the pride of the courtier, and the sorrow of the father have all faded into the velvet folds of history. What remains is the peace of knowing that the universe is vast, beautiful, and governed by laws that hold us all in a gentle, predictable embrace. The night sky has always been a mirror. For thousands of years, humanity looked up and saw perfection. We saw crystal spheres nesting one inside the other, rotating in a divine, silent harmony that had remained unchanged since the moment of creation. We believed that the earth was the heavy, motionless center of everything, grounded and significant, while the lights above were composed of a pure, unblemished quintessence ethereal matter that never aged, never crumbled, and never died. To shatter that mirror, to take a stone and crack the glass of the heavens, would require a mind that was equal parts brilliant and stubborn. It would require a man who was not afraid to be wrong, and even less afraid to be right. Before we step into the observatory of the man who would break the sky, take a moment to adjust your own surroundings. Allow your shoulders to drop away from your ears. Unclench your jaw. If you find value in these nightly journeys into the past, I invite you to subscribe and join our quiet community of dreamers. We travel together here, through the corridors of time. Galileo Galilei was not born a revolutionary. In fact, in his youth, he sought the quietest life imaginable. As a young man, he wore the rough habit of a novice at the Vallombrosa Abbey, seeking to dissolve his identity into the rhythmic chanting and silence of the priesthood. He found comfort in the predictable order of the monastery, a place where truth was something you read in holy books, not something you hunted for in the wild. But the world had other plans for him. His father, Vincenzo, a man of sharp intellect and musical genius, stormed into the abbey and forcibly removed his son. Vincenzo was a lutenist and a music theorist who understood that the world was governed by vibration and tension, not just ancient dogma. It is here, in the dusty workshop of his father, that the seeds of the son's rebellion were truly sown. Vincenzo did not trust the ancient Greeks just because they were ancient. He strung lutes and measured the tension of the gut strings, proving by experiment that the old masters like Pythagoras were incorrect about the mathematics of harmony. Young Galileo watched this. He saw that authority could be dismantled by a simple physical test. He saw that the truth made a sound if you plucked the right string. Vincenzo pushed his son toward medicine, dreaming of a lucrative career for the boy to support the family. But at the University of Pisa, Galileo was a terrible medical student. He found the lectures on anatomy tedious, his mind drifting instead to the clean, sharp lines of geometry. He would skip class to stand in the hallway and listen to the mathematics lectures, entranced by the logic of shapes and numbers. He eventually left without a degree, a dropout with a reputation for being difficult, argumentative, and brilliant. If you are enjoying this slow descent into history, please take a second to like this video. It helps guide others to this place of rest. By the time he was 25, the dropout had become a professor, appointed chair of mathematics. But the true turning point, the moment the universe shifted on its axis, arrived in 1609. Rumours drifted over the Alps of a Dutch invention, a curiosity called a spyglass that could make distant ships appear close. Most saw a toy, or perhaps a military advantage. Galileo saw a key. He did not invent the telescope, but he perfected it with the obsession of a desperate man. He taught himself to grind glass, his hands stained with abrasive powders, working for hours to shape lenses that would not distort the light. He increased the magnification to 30 times, turning a carnival novelty into a scientific instrument. And then he did something no one else had thought to do. He pointed it up. What he saw shattered the ancient crystal spheres forever. The moon was not a smooth, pearl-like orb of divine ether. It was a rock. It was jagged, scarred with deep craters and rising mountains, a world of violence and shadow just like the Earth. He watched the Terminator line the border between day and night on the lunar surface creep across the valleys, proving that the moon was a physical body, not a perfect light. Then he turned his glass toward Jupiter. He saw 3 small stars near the planet, and the next night they had moved. They were not fixed stars, they were moons, orbiting another world. This was heresy to the eyes of the ancients. If everything orbited the Earth, how could Jupiter have its own retinue? He named them the Medicean stars, after the Grand Duke of Tuscany, a calculated move of flattery to secure a position at court. You see, Galileo was not just a scientist. He was a man burdened by earthly debts. Following his father's death, he was responsible for the dowries of his sisters and the support of his indolent brother, Michelangelo. He needed money as much as he needed truth, but truth has a way of complicating survival. When Galileo turned his telescope to Venus, he found the smoking gun that would place him on a collision course with the Vatican. He observed that Venus went through phases, waxing and waning just like the moon. This was geometrically impossible in a system where the sun and planets orbited the Earth. It only made sense if Venus circled the sun. He was not an atheist trying to tear down the church. He was a devout Catholic who believed that the Bible taught us how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go. He believed that mathematics was the language God used to write the universe, and that by reading it, he was performing an act of worship. He wanted to save the church from the embarrassment of clinging to a disproven theory. But his pride was his undoing. In his famous book, The Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems, he wrote a conversation between 3 characters. The one who defended the old Earth-centered view was named Simplicio, or the Simpleton. In the mouth of this fool, Galileo placed the specific arguments of his former friend, Pope Urban VIII. It was a personal insult that turned a powerful protector into a bitter enemy. If you have ever felt misunderstood in your own intentions, you might find some kinship with this stubborn stargazer. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments, or simply let them drift away as we continue. The trial that followed is the stuff of legend, but the reality was a quiet, suffocating tragedy. There was no torture chamber, only the terrifying threat of it. An old man, 69 years of age, kneeling in a hall in Rome, forced to abjure, curse, and detest the truths he had seen with his own eyes. He whispered the words of recantation, his spirit broken, but the legend says that as he rose from his knees, he muttered, "And yet it moves." He was sentenced to house arrest for the remainder of his life. He was confined to a villa in Arcetri, ironically named Il Gioiello, the jewel. It was here, in the quiet confinement of the Tuscan hills, that the prisoner of the stars faced his greatest hardships. He was not alone in spirit, however. His greatest comfort came from his illegitimate daughter, Virginia, who had become Sister Maria Celeste. She was his anchor, though she lived in the poverty of the convent of San Matteo. She was his scribe, his apothecary, and his confidant. She sent him herbal remedies for his hernias and his melancholy, and he sent her food and wine. Their letters reveal a tenderness that belies his arrogant public persona, but tragedy struck again when she died young, leaving him untethered in the dark. And the dark did come. In his final years, the man who had seen more of the universe than any human in history went completely blind. The eyes that had discovered the rings of Saturn and the spots on the sun were drawn shut by age and illness. Yet, even in the darkness, his mind continued to work. He dictated his final masterpiece, Two New Sciences, laying the groundwork for physics and motion. He had to smuggle the manuscript out of Italy to Holland, like a spy in the night, to avoid the Inquisition's ban. He died in 1642, still a prisoner in his own home. The church refused to bury him in the main body of the basilica, hiding him away in a small room. It would take nearly a century for his body to be moved to a grand tomb in Santa Croce. During that movement, in a display of grotesque reverence, admirers snipped off 3 of his fingers and a tooth as relics. Today, his middle finger sits in a glass egg in a museum in Florence, pointing eternally upward, a defiant gesture, perhaps toward the Rome that tried to silence him, or maybe just pointing back to the stars he loved so dearly. He had a correspondence with another great mind, Johannes Kepler, who discovered that the planets moved in ellipses, not circles. Galileo, in his search for perfection, never accepted this. He believed the heavens must move in perfect circles. Even the man who broke the crystal spheres could not let go of his own desire for aesthetic perfection. He was flawed, brilliant, pious, and proud. As we leave Galileo in the quiet villa of Arcetri, listening to the rain fall on a world he could no longer see, we are reminded that truth exists independently of our ability to perceive it. The earth spun before we knew it, and it will spin long after we are gone. Now, as the image of the old astronomer fades, allow yourself to feel the gentle rotation of the world beneath your bed. You are held safe by the same gravity he studied. The arguments of the past are over. The telescope is laid down. The glass is cold. The stars continue their silent, elliptical drift, indifferent to the laws of men. The struggle of the debt-ridden son, the pride of the courtier, and the sorrow of the father have all faded into the velvet folds of history. What remains is the peace of knowing that the universe is vast, beautiful, and governed by laws that hold us all in a gentle, predictable embrace. The air in Tuscany carries a different weight than the cold, crisp winds of the north, where the Dutch glassmakers first polished their lenses. Here, in the rolling hills of Italy, the night sky feels like a heavy velvet curtain, pinned in place by diamond stars that have watched over the rise and fall of empires for millennia. As we descend into this chapter of history, allow your body to sink deeper into the mattress, letting the warmth of the Mediterranean imagination wrap around you. If you wish to continue these nightly journeys into the past, I invite you to subscribe to our channel, joining our quiet community of dreamers as we explore the minds that shaped our world. Before he was the grey-bearded sage staring through a tube, Galileo Galilei was a young man caught in a storm of expectations. It is easy to imagine him as a born rebel, but his heart first belonged to the silence of the cloister. As a young novice at the Vallombrosa Abbey, he wore the rough robes of a priest, seeking a life of prayer and solitude. But the world, represented by his father Vincenzo, would not let him go. Vincenzo, a musician of sharp intellect and sharper temper, stormed into the abbey and dragged his son back to the secular world, forcing him into the study of medicine. He did not see a priest in his son. He saw a doctor who could restore the family's fading fortune. Vincenzo was a man who tested the tension of lute strings, proving that the ancient laws of harmony could be rewritten by physical experiment. Young Galileo watched his father pluck those strings, listening to the vibrations that challenged the authority of the ancients. It was here, amidst the dust of rosin and the hum of music, that the seed of the scientific method was truly planted. He learned that truth was not found in dusty books, but in the tangible, vibrating reality of nature. If you find comfort in these stories of truth and discovery, please take a moment to gently press the like button, helping us share these quiet histories with others seeking rest. Yet genius often carries a heavy price tag. Galileo was a man perpetually chased by the shadow of debt. Following his father's death, the burden of the family fell squarely on his shoulders. He was responsible for the dowries of his sisters, vast sums of money he did not have, and he carried the weight of his younger brother, Michelangelo, a musician who borrowed endlessly and paid back nothing. This financial desperation became the engine of his ambition. When he looked up at the stars, he did not just see the glory of God, he saw a way to pay his bills. In the cool autumn of 1609, Galileo turned his improved spyglass toward the heavens. He saw what no human eye had ever seen. The moon was not a perfect celestial pearl, but a jagged world of craters and mountains, scarred and broken, just like the earth. But his most calculated discovery came when he turned his gaze to Jupiter. There, dancing in the darkness, were 4 bright sparks moons that orbited the giant planet. He saw an opportunity. In a stroke of political brilliance, he named them the Medicean Stars, dedicating them to the powerful Grand Duke of Tuscany, Cosimo II de' Medici. It was a celestial job application, and it worked. The flattered Duke appointed him the court mathematician of Florence. Galileo had won his place in the palace, securing the salary he so desperately needed, but in doing so he had stepped onto a stage where the eyes of the church were watching closely. He had proven that not everything revolved around the earth. He watched the phases of Venus, seeing the planet wax and wane just like the moon, a dance of light and shadow that was mathematically impossible unless Venus circled the sun. The old map of the universe was crumbling, and Galileo with his glass tube was holding the hammer. But Galileo was not a heretic seeking to destroy the faith. He was a devout Catholic, a man who believed that the Bible taught us how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go. He believed he was saving the church from a terrible error, offering them the second revelation of scientific truth. His downfall was not his lack of faith, but his abundance of pride. He believed he could outwit the theologians with logic. When he wrote his great defense of the sun-centered universe, the dialogue concerning the 2 chief world systems, he made a fatal error in judgment. He had been friends with Cardinal Matteo Barberini, who later became Pope Urban VIII. The Pope had asked for his own views to be included in the book. Galileo complied, but he placed the Pope's arguments in the mouth of a character named Simplicio, the simpleton. It was an insult that turned a powerful protector into a wounded enemy. The Pope, feeling betrayed and mocked by the very man he had supported, allowed the Inquisition to proceed. If you have ever felt the sting of a misunderstood intention, you might understand the tragedy that followed. Consider leaving a comment below about a time you had to stand by your own truth, however difficult. The trial that followed is the stuff of legend, but the reality was a quiet, crushing defeat. The old astronomer, now nearing 70, knelt and recanted his life's work. He was sentenced to house arrest, confined to his villa in Arcetri, known as Il Gioiello, the jewel. It was a beautiful prison overlooking the hills of Florence, but a prison nonetheless. And as the years passed, the light began to fade from his world in a literal sense. The eyes that had been the first to see the rings of Saturn and the craters of the moon slowly went blind. In this darkness, his greatest comfort came not from the stars, but from the daughter he had sent away. Virginia, known in the convent as Sister Maria Celeste, was the illegitimate child he had deemed unmarriageable. Yet from behind the walls of her convent she became his guardian angel. They exchanged hundreds of letters. She sent him herbal remedies for his hernia and his aching joints, organizing his household affairs from her cell. She was the one who stitched his frayed collars and soothed his frayed spirit. The bond between the condemned scientist and the cloistered nun is one of history's most tender ironies. Even in his blindness, the fire of his intellect did not go out. In the silence of Il Giallo, he dictated his final masterpiece, The Two New Sciences, laying the foundation for the physics of the future. He knew he was watched, so he smuggled the manuscript out of Italy, page by dangerous page, to a publisher in Holland. He was broken, sick, and isolated, yet he refused to let the truth remain a prisoner. When he finally passed into the great unknown, the church refused him a proper burial. But time has a way of balancing the scales. A century later, when his body was finally moved to a monumental tomb in Santa Croce, zealots and admirers snipped off 3 of his fingers as relics, treating the scientist like a saint. Today, his middle finger sits in a glass egg in a museum in Florence, pointing eternally toward the sky, and perhaps, subtly, towards Rome. Now, let the image of the Tuscan hills fade from your mind. The court intrigues, the debts, the pride, and the sorrow are all dust now. All that remains is the truth he found, the silent, majestic rotation of the spheres. The earth spins you gently into the night, held by the gravity he sought to understand. The stars are not judges, they are companions. They drift above your roof, indifferent and beautiful, marking the passage of time with a slow, rhythmic grace. The year is 1564, and the air in Pisa is thick with the scent of river water and old stone. The Renaissance is in full bloom, a time when art and ambition are painting the world in new colours. But in a modest house near the banks of the Arno, a different kind of mind is being born. Galileo Galilei enters a world where the heavens are considered perfect, immutable, and divine. He is born into a silence that he will spend his entire life trying to fill with the music of mathematics. His father, Vincenzo, is a musician, a lutenist who understands that the beauty of a note comes from the physical tension of a string. Before Galileo ever touches a telescope, he watches his father experiment. He sees Vincenzo stretching sheep-gut strings across the wooden belly of a lute, adding weights, testing the pitch, proving that the ancient authorities who wrote about music were wrong. It is here, in the dim candlelight of his father's study, surrounded by the smell of rosin and wood, that the seed of a dangerous idea is planted. Authority is not truth, only the experiment matters. As you settle deeper into the comfort of your bed, imagine the weight of expectation placed on the shoulders of a young man. Galileo is the eldest son, a position of heavy responsibility in Italy. He is expected to restore the family's faded fortune. His father tears him away from the quiet contemplation of the Vallombrosa Abbey, where the young Galileo had felt the pull of the priesthood. He is stripped of his novice's robes and thrust into the University of Pisa to study medicine. But the young man who sits in the lecture halls is not listening to the drone of the professors reciting Galen. His mind is elsewhere, tracing the geometry of the ceiling, finding comfort in the absolute certainty of shapes and angles. If you are enjoying this journey into the hidden lives of history, consider subscribing to our channel, allowing these stories to drift into your feed as you drift into sleep. Galileo leaves the university without a medical degree, a dropout with no prospects, yet his mind is on fire. He is not a doctor, but he has become a master of motion. By the age of 25, the failed medical student is the chair of mathematics, but he is poor. Desperately poor. His father dies, leaving him with the crushing burden of dowries for his sisters and a brother, Michelangelo, who borrows money he never returns. This financial anxiety becomes the rhythmic drumbeat of his life, a constant low-level panic that drives him to seek fame, to find a discovery that will secure his future. It is 1609. Rumours drift across the Alps from the Netherlands. A lens grinder has created a tube that makes distant objects appear close. Others see a toy, a parlour trick for amusement. Galileo sees a weapon of perception. He locks himself away, his hands stained with polishing powder, grinding glass with an obsession that borders on madness. He improves the design, pushing the magnification to 30 times. Imagine the first night he turns this spyglass toward the heavens. The city of Padua sleeps below him, dark and silent. The air is cold. He places his eye against the lead tube. What he sees shatters the crystalline perfection of the medieval universe. The moon is not a smooth pearl-like sphere as the poets and priests claimed. It is a rugged, scarred world. He sees mountains rising from the lunar surface, their shadows stretching long and sharp across deep valleys. It is a world of rock and dust, just like the earth. As we gaze through the lens of history, if you find peace in these nightly tales, please gently tap the like button, helping us share this calm with others seeking rest. He looks further. He finds 4 bright stars dancing around Jupiter. Night after night he tracks them, sketching their positions with ink on parchment. They are not stars, they are moons circling another world. This is the proof he needs. If moons can orbit Jupiter, then not everything orbits the Earth. The Earth is not the center of the universe. It is just another wanderer in the dark. But Galileo's a man of the world, not just the stars. He knows he needs protection. In a stroke of calculated genius, he names these new moons the Medicean stars, gifting them to the powerful Grand Duke of Tuscany, Cosimo de' Medici. It is a celestial bribe, and it works. He is appointed the court mathematician in Florence. He has fame, he has money, but he also has enemies. The most dangerous observation comes from the planet Venus. Through his telescope, Galileo watches Venus wax and wane, showing a full set of phases just like the moon. This is impossible in the old system. It is the smoking gun that proves Venus circles the sun. He feels the thrill of absolute knowledge, a high that no wine can replicate, but he forgets that truth, when it contradicts power, is a threat. Galileo is not an atheist. He is a devout Catholic who believes that the Bible teaches us how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go. He believes he is saving the Church from a terrible error. He writes letters, arguing that Scripture should be interpreted metaphorically when it conflicts with physical evidence. But in doing so, he steps onto sacred ground. Theologians do not like a mathematician telling them how to read the Bible. If you are finding comfort in the stillness of this story, feel free to leave a comment about which historical figure you would like to visit next in your dreams. The turning point comes with a book. In 1632, he publishes his masterpiece, The Dialogue, concerning the 2 chief world systems. It is a brilliant, witty conversation between 3 characters, but here the arrogance of genius betrays him. He takes the arguments of his old friend Pope Urban VIII and puts them into the mouth of a character named Simplicio, the simpleton. The Pope, once his protector, feels publicly humiliated. The shield of patronage shatters. Galileo is summoned to Rome. He is an old man now, nearly 70, plagued by arthritis and a hernia that makes every carriage ride an agony. He stands before the Inquisition, not as a defiant rebel, but as a terrified, broken man. He is shown the instruments of torture. The threat is real. On his knees, in the hall of the convent of Santa Maria sopra Minerva, he recites a formula he knows is a lie. He curses his own work. He denies the motion of the earth. He chooses life over martyrdom, a very human choice in the face of fire. He is sentenced to house arrest for the remainder of his life. He is exiled to a villa in Arcetri, known as Il Giello, the Jewel. It is a beautiful prison, nestled in the Tuscan hills, but a prison nonetheless. He is forbidden from teaching, forbidden from publishing, forbidden from speaking to the world. Yet, in this silence, a deep and tender love sustains him. His illegitimate daughter, Virginia, whom he had placed in a convent due to her poverty, becomes his lifeline. She takes the name Sister Maria Celeste. Through the high walls of her convent, she sends him baskets of citron, herbal remedies for his pain, and letters filled with a devotion that transcends the stars. She takes upon herself the penance of reciting the psalms that the Inquisition had assigned to him. She bears his spiritual burden so he can bear his physical one. Tragedy strikes again when she dies young, leaving him truly alone. And then the final darkness descends. Galileo goes blind. The eyes that had seen more than any human in history, the eyes that had seen the rings of Saturn and the mountains of the moon, are curtained by cataracts. He writes to a friend that the universe, which he had enlarged 1,000 times, has now shrunk to the narrow space of his own body. But the mind does not need eyes to see. In the darkness of his villa, surrounded by the silence of the hills, he does his greatest work. He dictates his final book, Two New Sciences, laying the foundation for the physics of the future. He smuggles the manuscript out of Italy to Holland, slipping it past the censors like a secret message in a bottle. As we near the end of our journey tonight, remember that even in confinement, the mind is free to roam the galaxy. If you wish to support our channel, please subscribe and let us continue to be your companions in the dark. Galileo Galilei dies in 1642, still a prisoner, still a believer, still a man who loved the truth more than comfort. He dies knowing that the earth spins, regardless of what the decrees say. He dies knowing that gravity pulls us all down into the sweet relief of rest, just as it pulls the moon around the earth. Today, visitors to Florence can see a strange relic in the Museo Galileo. It is his middle finger, snapped from his body a century after his death, preserved in a glass egg. It stands upright, defiant, pointing eternally toward the sky he loved, and perhaps, with a touch of Tuscan irony, pointing subtly toward Rome. Now, let the image of the Tuscan hills fade from your mind. The court intrigues, the debts, the pride, and the sorrow are all dust now. All that remains is the truth he found, the silent, majestic rotation of the spheres. The earth spins you gently into the night, held by the gravity he sought to understand. The stars are not judges, they are companions. They drift above your roof, indifferent and beautiful, marking the passage of time with a slow, rhythmic grace. The year is 1616. The air in Rome is heavy, thick with the scent of incense, damp stone, and the unspoken weight of centuries of authority. Night has fallen over the eternal city, draping the great domes and winding alleys in a velvet shroud of darkness. It is a quiet time, a time for reflection, a time when the noise of the day fades into the steady rhythm of a sleeping world. As you settle into your own stillness, let your breathing slow down. Match the pace of the drifting clouds above the Tiber River. Inhale the cool, ancient air and exhale the worries of the modern day. You are safe here, hidden in the shadows of history, observing a moment that will change the world forever. Before we walk the marble halls of the Vatican, we must understand the man who stands at the center of this gathering storm, Galileo Galilei. To understand the warning he is about to receive, we must look back at the fire that burns within him. It is a fire not just of intellect, but of stubborn, defiant belief. Before he was a mathematician, before he was the courtier of the Medici, he was a young boy listening to the plucking of lute strings in a house in Pisa. His father, Vincenzo, was a musician, but also a revolutionary in his own quiet way. Vincenzo did not accept the ancient theories of music simply because the Greeks had written them down. He tested them. He hung weights from strings, listening to the pitch change, proving that the old authorities were wrong. Young Galileo watched this. He learned a dangerous lesson that would haunt his entire life. Truth is not found in old books, but in the vibration of the world itself. If you enjoy uncovering these hidden threads of history, I invite you to subscribe to our channel, joining us as we unravel the minds of the past. Galileo carried this lesson with him when he was sent to the University of Pisa. His father wanted him to be a doctor, a stable, lucrative profession that would support the family. But Galileo was a dreamer who found the anatomy of the human body dull compared to the anatomy of the heavens. He would skip medical lectures to stand in the doorway of geometry classes, entranced by the purity of lines and angles. He was, in a sense, a failure by the standards of his time. He left university without a degree, a dropout with a brilliant mind and empty pockets. The burden of money was a constant grinding noise in his life, much like the sound of the lens-grinding wheel he would later master. After his father died, Galileo was left with the crushing responsibility of his family. He had sisters who needed dowries, massive sums of money required to secure them husbands, and a brother, Michelangelo, who was a drain on his resources. This financial desperation is often forgotten, but it was the engine that drove his ambition. He needed to be famous, not just for vanity, but for survival. If you are finding comfort in this story, please take a moment to like this video, helping us guide others to this place of rest. It was this need for a patron that led him to the stars. In 1610, he turned his homemade spyglass toward Jupiter. He was not looking for trouble. He was looking for a gift he could offer the Grand Duke of Tuscany. What he saw shattered the crystalline spheres of the ancients. 4 small stars dancing in a line around the giant planet. They were moons, a miniature solar system. He named them the Medicean stars, a stroke of marketing genius that won him the favor of the Medici family and a position as the court mathematician. But the telescope revealed things that could not be unsaid. He saw the moon not as a perfect smooth pearl as Aristotle claimed, but as a jagged, scarred rock with mountains and valleys just like Earth. He saw Venus shifting through phases of light and shadow, waxing and waning just like our moon, a dance that was mathematically impossible if Venus circled the Earth. It was the smoking gun. The Earth was not the center. The sun was the king of the sky. Galileo was not an atheist trying to tear down the church. He was a devout Catholic, a man who had once dreamed of being a monk at the Vallombrosa Abbey. He believed that the Bible was the true word of God, but he also believed that the universe was written in the language of mathematics. He famously said that the Bible shows the way to go to heaven, not the way the heavens go. He wanted to save his church from the embarrassment of clinging to a physical error. He wanted to harmonize his faith with his eyes, but in his passion and perhaps in his arrogance, he pushed too hard. Now we return to the dark night of 1616. The whisperings in Rome have grown to a roar. The Inquisition is awake. Galileo has been summoned to the palace of Cardinal Bellarmine. Bellarmine is a good man, a brilliant intellect, and a prince of the church. He does not hate Galileo. In fact, he admires him. But Bellarmine is the guardian of order in a chaotic world. Imagine the scene. The room is vast, lit by flickering candlelight that casts long, dancing shadows against the tapestries. The air is cool. Galileo stands there, perhaps rubbing the ache in his joints, the weariness of travel settling into his bones. He is 52 years old, his beard turning grey, his eyes tired from years of squinting into the dark. Bellarmine enters, his red robes rustling softly against the stone floor, a sound like dry leaves. The conversation is polite. There are no chains, no dungeons, not yet. This is a warning. Bellarmine speaks with a calm, terrifying precision. He informs Galileo that the doctrine of Copernicus, the idea that the earth moves and the sun stands still, is contrary to Holy Scripture. It cannot be defended. It cannot be held. Galileo listens. He feels the weight of the institution pressing down on him, heavier than the gravity he studies. He is being told to deny what his own eyes have seen. He is being told that the moons of Jupiter and the phases of Venus must be silent. The Cardinal hands him a certificate, a piece of paper that seals his silence. It is a polite command: abandon this opinion. Galileo bows. He accepts the decree. He is a son of the Church, and he obeys. But deep in his mind, the gears are still turning. The earth continues to spin beneath his feet, regardless of what is written on the parchment. He leaves the palace, stepping out into the Roman night. The stars are there, hanging above the dome of St. Peter's. They do not care about edicts or cardinals, they simply are. As he walks back to his lodgings, the silence of the city wraps around him. He is safe for now, but the seed of his future imprisonment has been planted. The conflict between the truth he sees and the obedience he owes has begun. But that is a storm for another time. For now, the warning has been delivered. The night is reclaiming its dominion. Let this scene fade from your mind. The red robes, the candlelight, the parchment, let them dissolve into the mist. You are far away from the intrigues of Rome. You are drifting in the vast, quiet space between the stars. There is no conflict here, only the peaceful, rhythmic rotation of the heavens. The same moon that Galileo studied watches over you now. It is a familiar friend, a guardian of the night. The complexity of the world is falling away. The arguments, the debts, the need to be right, they are all drifting off into the void. You are left with the simple, heavy comfort of sleep. Your body is relaxed, sinking deeper into the mattress, held by the same force that holds the planets in their courses. There is nothing left to solve tonight. The universe is unfolding exactly as it should, slow and steady. The night air in Tuscany has a specific quality to it. It is crisp, smelling of cypress and old stone, a scent that has not changed in centuries. As we settle into this story, imagine yourself breathing in that cool, ancient air. You are far away from the noise of the modern world. You are resting in a quiet room in a villa on the hills above Florence. The only sound is the wind moving through the olive groves and the slow, rhythmic beating of your own heart. Everything is still. Everything is waiting. Before the telescope, before the trials, and before the silence of house arrest, there was a young man with a conflict in his soul. Galileo Galilei was not born a revolutionary. In fact, in the quiet cloisters of his youth, he sought only the peace of the cloth. He was a novice at the Vallombrosa Abbey, a place of stone walls and chanted prayers. He wanted to be a priest. He found comfort in the order of the liturgy, in the predictable cycle of bells and hymns. But life, like the stars he would one day study, rarely moves in a perfect circle. His father, Vincenzo, was a man of music, but also a man of practical burdens. He marched into the abbey and removed his son, stripping him of the robes he wished to wear. Vincenzo was a musician, but he was also an experimentalist. He strung lutes and tested the tension of strings, proving that the ancient Greeks, the great authorities of the past, were wrong about the mathematics of harmony. Young Galileo watched his father. He saw that truth was not found in old books, but in the vibration of a string, in the physical world, in things you could touch and measure. This lesson took root deep in his mind as he was forced into the study of medicine at the University of Pisa. He was a reluctant doctor, sitting in lecture halls, his mind drifting away from anatomy and toward the geometry of the arches above his head. He would watch a chandelier swinging in the draught of the cathedral, timing its rhythm with his own pulse. Back and forth, back and forth. A pendulum of destiny. If you are enjoying this journey into the past, I invite you to quietly subscribe to our channel, joining us as we uncover more histories hidden in the dark. Galileo dropped out of medical school. He left without a degree, a disappointment to his father, yet he carried a fire that could not be extinguished. He was a man of contradictions, a devout Catholic, who believed God wrote the universe in the language of mathematics. He believed that to study the stars was to read the second book of God. The turning point came not with a grand theory, but with a tube of lead and glass. In 1609, rumours arrived from the north about a spyglass, a toy that could make distant ships appear close. Galileo did not just copy it, he mastered it. He ground his own lenses, his hands covered in the dust of glass, working late into the night until his fingers were raw. He improved the magnification to 30 times. And then he did something no one else had thought to do. He pointed it up. Imagine that moment. The silence of the Italian night, the cold metal of the tube against his eye. He looked at the moon, For thousands of years, humanity believed the moon was a perfect, smooth pearl, an unblemished sphere of the heavens. But through his glass, Galileo saw mountains. He saw valleys. He saw deep, jagged craters. It was a world of rock and ruin, just like Earth. The barrier between the heavens and the earth began to crumble. He looked to Jupiter. There, dancing around the giant planet, were 4 small points of light. Night after night, he tracked them. They were moons. A miniature solar system. This was dangerous knowledge. It meant that not everything revolved around the Earth. He named them the Medicean stars, a calculated gesture to flatter the Grand Duke of Tuscany, the powerful Medici family. It was a brilliant move of a desperate man. You see, Galileo was perpetually burdened by earthly debts. He was the eldest son, responsible for the dowries of his sisters and the debts of his musician brother. He needed the patronage. He needed the money. He wrapped his revolutionary discoveries in the velvet of courtly flattery. If you are finding comfort in the story, please take a moment to like this video, helping us guide others to this harbor of rest. But flattery could not protect him forever. The tragedy of Galileo is not just a battle between science and religion. It is a story of a broken friendship. In 1623, a new pope was elected, Urban VIII. Before he was pope, he was Cardinal Maffeo Barberini, a sophisticated intellectual who had walked in the gardens with Galileo, admiring his mind. Barberini was a friend. He encouraged Galileo to write, to discuss the structure of the universe, provided he treated the motion of the Earth as a mere hypothesis. Galileo, emboldened by this friendship, wrote his masterpiece, Dialogue, concerning the 2 chief world systems. It was a play, a conversation between 3 characters. There was Salviati, the brilliant defender of the Copernican system. There was Segredo, the intelligent layman. And then there was Simplicio. Simplicio was named after an ancient philosopher, but the name carried the undeniable weight of its double meaning, a simpleton, a fool. Simplicio defended the old view that the earth was stationary. He offered weak arguments that were easily dismantled by the brilliant Salviati. And then Galileo made his fatal error. He took the specific arguments of his friend Pope Urban VIII and put them into the mouth of Simplicio. It was an act of breathtaking arrogance, or perhaps a terrible miscalculation of tone. When the book was published, the Pope did not see a philosophical debate. He saw a public betrayal. He saw his own words spoken by a fool. The friend who had walked in the gardens with Galileo was gone, replaced by a pontiff who felt humiliated on the world stage. The machinery of the Inquisition began to turn. We often think of the Inquisition as a dungeon of torture, but for Galileo the pain was psychological. He was an old man now, nearly 70. He was summoned to Rome to face the consequences of his Simplicio. He was terrified. He was not a rebel looking for martyrdom. He was a faithful Catholic who believed he was right. He knelt. He recanted. He spoke the words they wanted to hear, denying the motion of the earth, though legend says he muttered under his breath. And yet it moves. He was sentenced to house arrest for the rest of his life. He was sent to a villa in Arcetri, called Il Gioiello, the Jewel. It was a beautiful prison, surrounded by rolling hills and olive trees. But the world was closing in on him in a more literal way. Galileo was going blind. The eyes that had been the first to see the craters of the moon and the phases of Venus were failing. The light was fading into a permanent grey. Yet, in this darkness, there was a light. His greatest comfort was his daughter Virginia. Because she was born out of wedlock, Galileo deemed her unmarriageable and placed her in a convent nearby, where she became Sister Maria Celeste. They were soulmates. She was his scribe, his apothecary, and his confessor. From behind the walls of her convent, she sent him herbal remedies for his hernia and his aching joints. She sent him citrons and baked pears. She took upon herself the penance of reciting the 7 penitential psalms that the Inquisition had assigned to him. It is a tender image to hold in your mind as you drift closer to sleep. The great scientist, blind and confined to his villa, listening to the letters of his daughter being read aloud. The universe had shrunk to the size of his garden, yet his mind continued to roam the cosmos. Even in his darkness, he dictated his final work, 2 new sciences, laying the foundation for physics. He smuggled the manuscript out to Holland, defying the ban on his words. There is a quiet irony in his end. He died in 1642, still a prisoner of the Church, still convinced of the glory of God's mathematical universe. A century later, when his body was moved to a grand tomb in Santa Croce, admirers, in a strange act of reverence, removed 3 of his fingers and a tooth. Today, the middle finger of Galileo Galilei sits in a glass egg in a museum in Florence. It points eternally upward, toward the sky, toward the Rome that silenced him, and toward the stars that liberated him. Now, let the image of the Tuscan hills return to you. The villa in Arcetri is quiet. The telescope sits in the corner, a silent sentinel of the night. The arguments with the Pope, the debts to his family, the need to prove the motion of the planets, all of it has settled into the dust of history. What remains is the peace of the night. Galileo once wrote that the Bible teaches how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go. Now he knows both. The struggle is over. The heavy velvet curtain of the past is drawn. You are safe here, floating in the gentle stream of time. There are no more calculations to make, no more stars to map. There is only the soft, endless drift of the cosmos. The carriage wheels turned slowly through the mud, grinding against the stones of the Tuscan road. It was January in the year 1633, and the winter air bit deep into the bones of the old man huddled inside. This was the winter journey of Galileo Galilei, a man summoned to Rome not to receive an award, but to answer for the crime of seeing the universe as it truly was. As the carriage rocked in a hypnotic rhythm, swaying back and forth like a pendulum in the dark, his mind drifted away from the cold discomfort of the present. He allowed himself to float backward, upstream against the river of time, to a place of warmth and silence. He remembered the smell of incense and beeswax. Long before he was the world's most famous scientist, he was merely a boy, a novice at the Vallombrosa Abbey. In the quiet sanctuary of the monastery, a young Galileo had found a profound peace. He had wanted to stay there forever, to join the priesthood, and lose himself in the chanting of hymns and the study of scripture. It is a strange irony to consider now, as we rest here in the comfort of the night, that the man accused of heresy began his life with a desperate desire to serve God within the stone walls of the church. But life, like the stars, follows a path that is often invisible until the journey is complete. His father, Vincenzo, had other plans. Vincenzo was a musician, a theorist who understood that the world was built on vibration and tension. He forcibly removed his son from the abbey, dragging him away from the altar and pushing him toward the University of Pisa to study medicine. If you are enjoying this journey into the hidden corners of history, do take a moment to gently press the like button, allowing us to continue weaving these tales for you. Vincenzo unwittingly planted the seeds of rebellion in his son. By conducting experiments on the tension of lute strings, Vincenzo proved that the ancient authorities of music were wrong. Young Galileo watched, and he learned a dangerous lesson: that truth is not found in old books, but in the physical testing of the world. Galileo was a terrible medical student. He found the lectures dull, his mind wandering to the geometry of the lecture hall rather than the anatomy of the body. He eventually dropped out, a failure in the eyes of the university. Yet his reputation as a brilliant mind began to spread like a fire in dry grass. He was burdened, however, by the heavy weight of duty. After his father's death, Galileo became the patriarch, responsible for the crushing dowries of his sisters and the debts of his brother, Michelangelo, a musician who borrowed money with no intention of returning it. This financial desperation fueled Galileo, driving him to invent, to calculate, and to seek the patronage of the powerful. It was this hunger, combined with genius, that led him to the spyglass. In 1609, he did not invent the telescope, but he perfected it. Imagine the sound of grinding glass, the repetitive, soothing motion of his hands shaping the lenses hour after hour, until they were capable of magnifying the world 30 times over. When he finally lifted that tube to the sky, the silence of the night was shattered by revelation. He saw the moon not as a perfect heavenly sphere of Aristotle's imagination, but as a jagged rock, scarred by craters and rising mountains. He saw that the heavens were earth-like, imperfect and beautiful. He turned his glass toward Jupiter and saw 4 small points of light dancing around the giant planet. He knew, with the instinct of a survivor, that this was his currency. He named them the Medicean stars, a gift to the Grand Duke of Tuscany. It was a brilliant maneuver, securing him a position at court, but it also placed him on a collision course with destiny. If you wish to hear more stories of the stars and the minds that mapped them, consider subscribing to join us on this nightly voyage. Galileo observed Venus and saw that it waxed and waned like the moon, a phenomenon only possible if it circled the sun. The evidence was undeniable. The sun, not the earth, was the half of the solar system. Yet Galileo was not a rebel by nature. He was a believer. He famously said that the Bible shows the way to go to heaven, not the way the heavens go. He believed he was saving the church from a terrible error, offering the truth of nature as a second revelation. But pride is a heavy cloak. In his famous book, The Dialogue, he placed the arguments of his old friend Pope Urban VIII into the mouth of a character named Simplicio the Simpleton. It was an insult that turned a powerful protector into a wounded enemy. Now, let us return to that winter journey. The carriage finally stops. The trial is a blur of voices and shadows, but the true end of the story is not in the courtroom. It is in the quiet villa of Arcetri, where he was sentenced to house arrest. He called it Il Gioiello, the jewel. Here, the world began to fade. His eyes, which had seen more than any human in history, succumbed to darkness. He went blind, trapped in a world of shadows. Yet, he was not alone. His greatest comfort came from his illegitimate daughter Virginia, who had become Sister Maria Celeste. Though separated by the walls of her convent and his villa, their souls were entwined. She was his apothecary, sending him candied citrons and herbal remedies for his hernia and his aching joints. She took the burden of his despair upon herself, writing letters that were balms to his wounded spirit. If you have thoughts on such loyalty, feel free to share them in the comments, for these human connections are the heart of history. In the darkness of Arcetri, blind and defeated, Galileo performed his final act of defiance. He mentally organized his life's work on physics, the study of motion and falling bodies. He dictated the words, smuggling the manuscript out to Holland, beyond the reach of the Inquisition. This was his masterpiece, Two New Sciences, a book that would lay the foundation for the future. He died in the quiet of winter in 1642. Years later, where his body was moved to a grand tomb, admirers, in a grotesque act of reverence, removed 3 of his fingers and a tooth. Today, his middle finger sits in a glass egg in a museum in Florence. It stands straight and tall, pointing eternally toward Rome, a final, silent gesture from the prisoner of the stars. The carriage has stopped moving. The winter journey is over. The arguments, the debts, the cold nights, grinding glass, they have all dissolved into the ether. There is only the spinning earth, carrying you and Galileo together into the velvet embrace of sleep. The stars are right where he left them, steady, bright, watching over you. The year is 1633, and the night sky over Rome is not a canvas of wonder, but a heavy, suffocating blanket. The air is thick with the scent of incense and the dust of ancient stone, a smell that has permeated the eternal city for centuries. But for the old man kneeling on the cold marble floor, the weight of the atmosphere is not physical, it is spiritual. He is nearly 70 years old. His knees ache. His eyes, which once pierced the veil of the heavens to see things no human had ever seen, are growing dim. He is Galileo Galilei, the most famous mathematician in Europe, and he is afraid. Before we walk the path that led him to this moment of terror, let us drift back, far away from the imposing halls of the Inquisition, to a time when the world was quieter. and the stars were simply lights, not mysteries. It begins not with science, but with sound. Close your eyes and imagine the vibration of a lute string in a sunlit room in Pisa. Galileo was born into a house filled with music. His father, Vincenzo, was a lutenist and a theorist, a man who believed that the rules of harmony were not dictated by ancient ghosts, but by the physical reality of tension and length. Young Galileo watched his father stretch gut strings across wood, adding weights, testing the pitch, listening to the air hum. This is where the seed was planted. Before he ever looked up, he looked down at his father's hands. He learned that authority, even the authority of the great Pythagoras, could be challenged by a simple experiment. If the string says one thing, and the ancient books say another, the string is right. It was a dangerous lesson to learn in a world built on obedience, but it was a lesson that would define his soul. As we settle into this story, allowing the day's tension to unwind just as a lute string loosens, consider subscribing to our channel. It helps us bring these stories from the shadows of history into the comfort of your night. Galileo was not destined for science initially. He was a man of deep, volatile passion. As a young man, he felt the pull of the divine. He wore the robes of a novice at the Vallombrosa Abbey, seeking the silence of the priesthood. He wanted to lose himself in God, but his father, practical and demanding, dragged him from the sanctuary. There was no money in prayer, Vincenzo argued. The family needed a doctor. So Galileo went to the University of Pisa to study medicine. But imagine the mind of a genius sitting in a dull lecture hall, listening to professors recite Galen and Aristotle as if they were unchangeable laws. He was bored. He drifted. He skipped classes to stand in the hallway and listen to the geometry lectures, entranced by the purity of shapes and numbers. He left medical school without a degree, a dropout with a brilliant mind and an empty purse. This financial emptiness is a thread that binds his life as tightly as gravity binds the planets. After his father died, the burden of the family fell on Galileo's shoulders. He was the eldest son. He had dowries to pay for his sisters. He had a brother, Michelangelo, a musician of great talent but terrible responsibility, who constantly drained Galileo's resources. The great scientist was perpetually broke. This desperation fueled his ambition. He didn't just need to discover truth, he needed to sell it. The turning point came in 1609. Rumours drifted over the Alps of a Dutch invention, a spyglass, that could make distant ships appear close. Galileo did not invent the telescope, but he possessed the hands of a craftsman and the mind of a geometrician. He ground his own glass. He smoothed the lenses with obsessive care, his hands covered in the fine white dust of silica. He improved the magnification to 30 times. Then he did something no one else had thought to do. He turned the tube upward. Imagine the silence of that first night in the garden. The cool Italian air, the smell of cypress trees. He puts his eye to the lens. The moon, previously believed to be a perfect smooth sphere of divine alabaster, resolves into focus, and it is broken. It is a jagged, cratered rock, scarred by mountains and valleys, just like the earth. It was a revelation that shattered the crystal spheres of the ancients. The heavens were not perfect, they were physical. If you are enjoying this journey into the past, please take a moment to like this video. It allows us to continue weaving these nocturnal tapestries for you. He looked further. He saw Jupiter, the king of planets, but dancing around it were 4 tiny stars that moved night after night. They were moons, a miniature solar system. This was the proof he needed, but it was also a weapon. Desperate for money and status, Galileo named these moons the Medicean stars, gifting them to the Grand Duke of Tuscany, Cosimo de' Medici. It was a brilliant marketing move. The Duke was flattered to have his name written in the heavens, and Galileo was appointed the court mathematician. He had won security, but he had stepped onto a stage that was far more dangerous than he realized. His confidence grew into arrogance. He discovered the phases of Venus, proof that the planet orbited the Sun, not the Earth. To Galileo, this was not just math, it was a religious experience. He believed that the Bible taught us how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go. He thought he was saving the Church from a terrible error. He believed that if he could just show the Pope the truth, the Church would embrace the new architecture of the universe. But Galileo had a flaw. He could not just be right. He had to prove others wrong, often with biting wit. He wrote a book, The Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems. It was a masterpiece of science, but a disaster of diplomacy. He created 3 characters to discuss the universe. One was wise, representing Galileo. One was neutral, and the third, who defended the old Earth-centered view, was named Simplicio, the simpleton. Here lies the tragedy. Into the mouth of the simpleton, Galileo put the arguments of his old friend, Pope Urban VIII. The Pope, a man who had once admired Galileo, felt publicly humiliated. The protector turned into the prosecutor. The machinery of the Inquisition began to turn, slowly, grinding like the tectonic plates of the earth. In 1633, the terror of Rome descended. Galileo was summoned. He was old, suffering from a painful hernia and terrified. He was not a rebel by nature. He was a faithful Catholic who feared the fires of hell. The threat of torture hung in the air, unspoken but present. He was shown the instruments of pain. And so he knelt. He recanted. He read the prepared statement, cursing his own life's work, denying the motion of the earth. Legend says that as he rose from his knees, he muttered, "And yet it moves." But in reality, there was only silence. A broken man, accepting his defeat to save his life. He was sentenced to house arrest for the remainder of his days. But this is where the story shifts from terror to a quiet, melancholic beauty. He was confined to a villa in Arcetri, known as Il Gioiello, the Jewel. It was a comfortable prison, nestled in the hills above Florence. As his world shrank to the perimeter of his garden, his body began to fail him. The eyes that had seen the rings of Saturn and the mountains of the moon slowly went dark. Galileo went completely blind. The universe he had opened up to humanity was closed off to him forever. He lived in a world of memory and sound. Yet, he was not entirely alone. His greatest comfort came from the person he had wronged the most. Years earlier, Galileo had deemed his 2 daughters illegitimate and unmarriageable, placing them in a convent to live in poverty and seclusion. His eldest daughter, Virginia, who took the name Sister Maria Celeste, did not resent him. Instead, she became his guardian angel. From behind the convent walls, she wrote to him constantly. Her letters are a testament to a love that transcends disappointment. She sent him herbal remedies for his aches, citron, rosemary, and dried fruits. She mended his collars. She mended his collars. She managed his finances. She was his scribe, his apothecary, and his confessor. While he was the prisoner of the stars, she was the prisoner of the Church, and their souls met in the quiet exchange of paper and ink. In the darkness of his blindness, Galileo's mind remained luminous. He could no longer see the planets, so he turned his thoughts back to the motion of objects on Earth. In his head, he rolled balls down inclined planes. He calculated the strength of beams. He smuggled his final manuscript, a book called Two New Sciences, out of Italy. It travelled in secret, hidden in the luggage of travellers, moving north to Holland, beyond the reach of the Inquisition. This book would lay the foundation for physics, for Newton, for the modern world. Even as his body withered, his mind refused to stop moving. He was like the earth he had defended, constant, spinning, enduring. In the winter of 1642, the silence finally came for him. Sister Maria Celeste had died before him, a grief that nearly broke him, but now he was ready to join her. The fire in the hearth of Il Gioiello burned down to embers. The great heart of the terror of Rome slowed to a halt. Years later, in a strange twist of fate, when his body was being moved to a grand tomb in Santa Croce, admirers, in a grotesque act of reverence, removed 3 of his fingers and a tooth. It was a medieval practice applied to a man of the future. Today, his middle finger sits in a glass egg in a museum in Florence. It stands straight and tall, pointing eternally toward Rome, a final silent gesture from the prisoner of the stars. The stone floor of the convent of Santa Maria sopra Minerva in Rome is cold, a chill that seeps through layers of wool and linen, settling deep into the marrow of an old man's bones. It is June, the year 1633, and the air is thick with the scent of beeswax candles and the heavy, suffocating weight of judgment. In the centre of the great hall, a man of 70 years lowers himself slowly, painfully. His knees crack against the hard marble, a sound that echoes in the silence of the Inquisition. This is Galileo Galilei, the man who dared to look up, now forced to look down. He is not merely a scientist in this moment. He is a penitent, a broken vessel, stripped of his titles, his dignity, and his voice. But even as his head bows in submission, his mind is a universe unto itself, spinning with memories that defy the stillness of the room. To understand the weight of this kneeling man, one must look back to the boy he once was, a boy who never intended to study the stars, but rather the silence of the soul. Long before he became the architect of modern physics, young Galileo wore the rough habit of a novice at the Vallombrosa Abbey. He had found a profound peace in the rhythmic chanting of the monks, a desire to lose himself in the mystery of God. He wanted to be a priest, but the world, it seemed, had other plans. His father, Vincenzo, a man of sharp intellect and sharper temper, tore him from the abbey's embrace. Vincenzo was a musician, a theorist who understood that the world was not governed by mysticism, but by tension and release. He dragged his son back to the noise of the city, forcing him into the University of Pisa to study medicine. If you are finding comfort in this journey through time, allowing the currents of history to carry you away from the waking world, do take a moment to subscribe to our channel. It helps us keep the lantern lit for these nightly voyages. It was in those medical lectures that Galileo's mind began to wander. He was a poor student of the body, bored by the rote memorization of Galen's anatomy. Instead, he found himself drawn to the geometry of the lecture hall itself, the swing of a chandelier, the arc of light through a window. He remembered his father's experiments with lute strings. Vincenzo had proven that the pitch of a note depended on the tension and weight of the string, a physical reality that could be measured, tested, and proven. This was the seed of rebellion. Authority, whether it was the ancient Greeks or the Church Fathers, could be wrong. Only nature, tested by the hand and the eye, told the absolute truth. The years passed, and the medical student became the mathematician, but he was haunted by a very earthly burden: debt. Following his father's death, Galileo became the head of the household, saddled with the responsibility of providing dowries for his sisters and supporting a brother, Michelangelo, who squandered money on dreams of musical grandeur. The great mind that mapped the heavens was fueled by the desperate need for coin. He needed a patron. He needed fame. And in 1609 he found the tool that would give him both. He heard rumours of a spyglass from the north, a toy that made distant ships appear close. Galileo did not just copy it, he mastered it. With his own hands grinding glass until his fingers bled and his back ached, he improved the magnification to 30 times the power of the eye. When he pointed this tube toward the night sky, the universe shattered. For centuries, humanity believed the moon was a perfect celestial pearl, smooth and divine. Galileo saw the truth. It was a rock. It was scarred with jagged mountains, deep valleys, and cratered wastelands, not unlike the earth itself. If the moon was imperfect, what else had the ancients lied about? He turned his glass to Jupiter and saw 4 tiny points of light dancing around the giant planet. They were moons, a miniature solar system. He shrewdly named them the Medicean stars, a brilliant act of flattery to win the favour of the Grand Duke of Tuscany. It worked. He secured his position, his salary, and his fame. But in naming the stars, he had also signed his own warrant. As we drift deeper into the story, if you feel the heaviness of sleep approaching, please like this video. It serves as a quiet signal that you are with us in the dark. His confidence grew into a dangerous arrogance. He discovered the phases of Venus, proving that the planet orbited the Sun, not the Earth. To Galileo, this was not just math, it was a new revelation. He believed, with a naive and devout heart, that he was saving the Church from a terrible error. He famously argued that the Bible tells us how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go. But he forgot that institutions do not like to be corrected, especially not by a man who wrote with such biting wit. In his most famous book, The Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems, he made a fatal mistake. He took the arguments of the Pope, his former friend, Urban VIII, and placed them in the mouth of a character named Simplicio, the simpleton. It was a slight the Pope would never forgive, and so we return to the kneeling man. The trial was not a debate, it was a demolition. Threatened with torture, broken by age and illness, Galileo recanted. "I abjure, curse, and detest the aforesaid errors and heresies," he whispered, his voice trembling against the cold stone. "The legend says," he muttered, "and yet it moves," as he rose, but in reality he was too broken for defiance. He had tried to marry faith and reason, and they had divorced him, leaving him isolated in the wreckage. He was sentenced to house arrest for the remainder of his life. He retreated to a villa in Arcetri, ironically named Il Gioiello, the jewel. Here the tragedy of his life deepened. The eyes that had seen the rings of Saturn and the mountains of the moon slowly failed him. Darkness crept in from the edges of his vision until the great observer was left in total blackness. Yet, in this shadow, a light remained. His daughter Virginia, who had taken the veil as Sister Maria Celeste, became his greatest comfort. Though she lived in a nearby convent, her letters were his lifeline. She sent him herbal remedies for his hernia, sweetmeats to lift his spirits, and love that asked for no dowry. She was the one star that never set. If you are listening to the sound of my voice and feeling the calm of the night, leave a comment below. Let us know where your mind travels as you rest. Even blind and imprisoned, Galileo's mind refused to stop working. In the silence of Arcetri, he dictated his final masterpiece, The Two New Sciences, a work that would lay the foundation for physics itself. He had to smuggle the manuscript out of Italy to Holland, like a thief hiding stolen jewels, to avoid the Inquisition's ban. He was a prisoner, yes, but his thoughts were free, roaming the cosmos in a way his body never could again. He corresponded with Johannes Kepler, though even here Galileo's stubbornness showed. He refused to accept Kepler's discovery that planets moved in ellipses. Galileo's aesthetic soul demanded circles, perfect and divine. Even the genius had his blind spots. The end came quietly in 1642. The fire that had burned so brightly, illuminating the dark corners of the solar system, finally flickered out. The Church refused him a proper burial for nearly a century, fearful of the man even in death. But time, like the tides he studied, eventually turned. Years later, in a strange twist of fate, when his body was being moved to a grand tomb in Santa Croce, admirers, in a grotesque act of reverence, removed 3 of his fingers and a tooth. It was a medieval practice applied to a man of the future. Today, his middle finger sits in a glass egg in a museum in Florence. It stands straight and tall, pointing eternally toward Rome, a final, silent gesture from the prisoner of the stars. The hills of Arcetri, just south of Florence, possess a particular kind of silence. It is not the empty silence of a desert, but a living, breathing quiet, filled with the rustle of olive leaves and the distant rhythmic chirping of cicadas. Here the air is cooler than in the stifling stone streets of the city below. It was here, in a villa ironically named Il Gioiello, or the Jewel, that the old man came to serve his final sentence. The world knew him as the great disruptor, the man who had dared to stop the sun and move the earth. But to the creeping shadows of the villa, he was simply a father, broken by the weight of his own brilliance. If you are finding comfort in the quiet of these hills, and if the stories of the past help you drift away from the noise of the present, I invite you to subscribe to our channel. Let us build a sanctuary of history together, here in the dark. Galileo Galilei was 69 years old when he arrived at Il Gioiello in 1633. The fire of his youth, that pugnacious energy that had driven him to mock philosophers and challenge the very heavens, had been dampened by the cold stone of the Inquisition. He had knelt before the cardinals in Rome. He had recited the words they demanded. He had abjured, cursed, and detested his own errors. But as he settled into the confinement of his villa, a different kind of truth began to settle upon him. It was not the truth of mathematics, or of the moons of Jupiter he had once so proudly named the Medicean stars to flatter a duke. It was the truth of solitude. He was a prisoner, yes, but his prison had a window. From his terrace he could not see the great cities of Europe, where his name was whispered with a mixture of awe and heresy. He could only see the sky, and he could see the convent of San Matteo, just a stone's throw away down the sloping hill. Inside those walls lived the one soul who truly understood the architecture of his heart, his daughter, Virginia, known to the world and to God as Sister Maria Celeste. Their relationship was a tapestry woven from guilt and grace. Years ago, consumed by financial desperation and the burden of being the eldest son, Galileo had made a hard calculation. He had been responsible for the dowries of his sisters, debts left behind by his father. Vincenzo, a musician who had taught him that authority could be challenged, but who had left him with little gold to do so. Overwhelmed by the need to secure his own standing, Galileo had deemed his illegitimate daughters unmarriageable. He had placed Virginia in the convent when she was barely a teenager, locking her away from the world just as the church would later lock him away. Yet, in the silence of Arcetri, the walls between them seemed to vanish. Maria Celeste was not merely a nun, she was his apothecary, his scribe, and his anchor. As you listen to the wind moving through the cypress trees outside his window, imagine the letters travelling back and forth between the villa and the convent. They were lifelines. She sent him herbal remedies for his hernia, citron fruit candied in sugar to sweeten his bitter days, and bleached collars to keep him dignified. He sent her money, news of the outside world, and the unvarnished truth of his suffering. If you enjoy the slow unraveling of these hidden histories, please take a moment to like this video. It helps other weary travelers find their way to our campfire. The tragedy of Galileo's final years was not just his imprisonment. It was the irony of his intellectual pride. He had spent a lifetime fighting for the Copernican system, arguing that the Earth orbited the Sun. He had believed, with a naive and devout certainty, that he could save the Church from a terrible error. He believed that scientific truth was a second form of revelation, a language of God written in triangles and circles. But his arrogance had been his undoing. In his dialogue concerning the two chief world systems, he had placed the arguments of his former friend, Pope Urban VIII, into the mouth of a character named Simplicio, the simpleton. Now, the simpleton sat on the throne of St. Peter, and the genius sat in a villa in Arcetri, listening to the footsteps of guards. But the greatest blow was yet to come. Only a few months after his return to Florence, while he was still learning the geography of his prison, Maria Celeste fell ill. She had carried the weight of his trial on her shoulders, fasting and praying for his salvation with a ferocity that consumed her fragility. In the spring of 1634, she died. The silence that descended on Il Gioiello then was absolute. The letters stopped. The baskets of candied fruit stopped. The voice that had soothed his vanity and calmed his fears was gone. Galileo fell into a deep depression. He refused to eat. He listened to the bells of San Matteo tolling down the hill, each ring a reminder of the daughter he had shut away, who had loved him despite his flaws. As the months turned into years, a darkness of a different kind began to creep into the villa. The man who had expanded the vision of humanity, who had seen the jagged mountains of the moon and the phases of Venus, began to lose his sight. It started as a cloudiness, a blurring of the sharp lines of geometry he loved so dearly. Slowly, relentlessly, the world turned grey. By 1638, the prisoner of the stars was completely blind. Consider the cruelty of this fate. The eyes that had pierced the veil of the heavens, that had seen more than any human being in history, were now useless. He could no longer see the sun he had championed. He could no longer see the Medicean stars circling Jupiter. He was trapped in a universe of sound and touch. He wrote to a friend, "This heaven, this earth, this universe which I have enlarged 100, nay 1,000-fold beyond the limits commonly seen by dreamers of the past, are now shrunken and dwindled to the narrow limits of my own body. And yet, in this darkness, the mind of the mathematician did not sleep. If you have thoughts on the resilience of the human spirit, feel free to share them in the comments below. We read them all as we prepare the next journey." Blind, grieving, and imprisoned, Galileo performed his final act of rebellion. He realized that while the Church had banned his writings on astronomy, they had not explicitly forbidden his work on physics, the study of how things move on Earth. In the dark, dictating to young students who came to serve as his eyes, he returned to the experiments of his youth. He thought of his father, Vincenzo, testing the tension of strings. He thought of the pendulum swinging in the Cathedral of Pisa. He began to compose his final masterpiece, discourses and mathematical demonstrations relating to two new sciences. It was a book about strength and motion, about how beams break and how projectiles fly. It was less controversial than the motion of the Earth, but it was the foundation of all modern physics. It was the bedrock upon which Isaac Newton would later build. But he could not publish it in Italy. The Inquisition shadow was too long. So the blind old man became a smuggler. The manuscript was secretly copied, page by laborious page. It was hidden in the luggage of a visiting prince, passed through the hands of sympathetic ambassadors, and carried over the Alps to the misty, free presses of Holland. While Galileo sat in the dark in Arcetri, his mind was travelling north, breaking free of the censorship that tried to contain it. The book was published in Leiden, far from the reach of Rome. He would never see a copy with his own eyes, but he could feel the weight of the pages in his hands when a copy was finally smuggled back to him. He ran his fingers over the leather cover, a blind father holding his last child. The seasons cycled through the Tuscan hills. The winter winds rattled the shutters of Vigée. Galileo's health waned. The hernia, the palpitations, the insomnia, they all gathered like old friends around his bed. But the anger was gone. The need to prove Simplicio wrong had faded. In the end, there was only the rhythm of the breath and the certainty of the laws he had discovered. He had once written that the Bible shows the way to go to heaven, not the way the heavens go. Now he prepared for that final journey. He had been a reluctant doctor, a brilliant mathematician, a courtier, a father, and a heretic. But as the end approached in January of 1642, he was simply a tired old man longing for the silence to be complete. He died with the name of Jesus and Mary on his lips, a Catholic to the end, despite everything. The Church refused to bury him in the main body of the Basilica of Santa Croce. They hid his body in a small room under the bell tower, a final petty punishment for the man who had realigned the cosmos. It would take nearly a century before he was moved to the grand tomb where he rests today and where his finger points eternally toward Rome. But that is a story of marble and bone. The real story ends in the quiet villa, where the lamp has finally burned out. The struggle is over. The telescope sits in the corner, a brass tube gathering dust, its glass eye blind to the night. The letters from Maria Celeste are tucked away in a wooden box, preserving the love that survived the convent walls. As you lie there, let the image of the villa fade. The heavy wooden doors are closed. The garden is still. The earth continues to spin, rotating on its axis just as he said it did, carrying the villa, the tomb, and you into the velvet embrace of the night. It does not matter what the inquisitors said. It does not matter what the decrees proclaimed, Eper Saimiovi, and yet it moves. The hills of Arcetri, just south of Florence, are quiet places. In the 17th century, they were a sanctuary of silence, far removed from the political noise of Rome and the bustling markets of the city below. Here, amidst the olive groves and the vineyards that cling to the rolling Tuscan earth, stood a villa known as Il Gioiello, the jewel. It was a white-walled house with green shutters, surrounded by a garden where the wind whispered secrets through the cypress trees. But for the old man who lived inside, this jewel was a cage. Imagine the year 1638. The air in the villa is cool and still. An old man sits in a heavy wooden chair near the hearth. His beard is long and white, flowing down onto a chest that has grown thin with age. His eyes, once the most perceptive in all of Europe, are now clouded and useless. Galileo Galilei, the man who opened the universe to human sight, has gone completely blind. He sits in the darkness of his own making, a prisoner of the Inquisition, confined to this house until his dying day. If you are enjoying this journey into the quiet corners of history, please take a moment to subscribe so we may continue to explore the past together. As he sits there, listening to the crackle of the fire, his mind is not in the room. It travels back, far beyond the walls of his confinement. He remembers the beginning, long before the trouble, long before the stars. He remembers the smell of incense at the Vallombrosa Abbey. There was a time when this man of science deeply desired to be a man of God. He had been a novice, wearing the robes, ready to give his life to the priesthood. It is a strange irony to consider that the man the church would one day condemn as a heretic started his life desperate to join their ranks. But history is often steered by fathers. Vincenzo, a musician and a theorist, had stormed into the abbey and dragged his son away. He wanted a doctor in the family, not a monk. He wanted wealth, not poverty. Yet Vincenzo taught his son something more dangerous than medicine. He taught him to doubt. Vincenzo would experiment with the strings of his lute, testing the tension to see how pitch changed, proving that the ancient Greeks were wrong about the mathematics of music. Young Galileo watched. He learned that authority, even the authority of thousands of years, could be toppled by a single, well-placed experiment. The old man shifts in his chair, his hand trembling slightly. The fire pops. He thinks of the day he turned his back on medicine to chase the purity of geometry. He thinks of the financial weight that crushed his shoulders. He was the eldest son, burdened with the debts of a dead father, responsible for the dowries of sisters, supporting a brother who took everything and gave nothing. It was this desperate need for coin that sharpened his ambition. It drove him to the workshops where he ground glass with his own hands, his fingers stained with polishing powder, creating the weapon that would change everything, the spyglass. With a magnification of 30 times, he had looked up. He saw the moon, not as a perfect divine sphere of alabaster, but as a rugged, scarred rock, marred by craters and mountains, just like the earth. He saw the face of God's creation, and it was terrified and beautiful. If you find peace in these discoveries, do gently like this video to help us share the stars with others. He remembers the rush of discovery, the 4 points of light dancing around Jupiter. He had named them the Medicean stars, a brilliant stroke of flattery to win the patronage of the Grand Duke of Tuscany. It worked. He rose to the height of fame, the court mathematician, the man who dined with princes. But pride is a blinding light. In his arrogance, he had forgotten the shadow. He wrote his great dialogue, a debate about the universe, and he made a fatal error. He took the words of his friend, Pope Urban VIII, and placed them in the mouth of a character named Simplicio the Simpleton. The betrayal cut deep. The friend became the judge, the protector became the inquisitor, and now the courtier is a captive. But the silence of Arcetri is not empty. It is filled with the presence of the one person who truly understood his heart. He reaches out a hand as if to touch a letter that is no longer there. Virginia, his daughter. Because she was born out of wedlock, he deemed her unmarriageable, placing her in the convent of San Matteo at 16, where she became Sister Maria Celeste. She was his light. From behind the convent walls, she had sent him herbal remedies for his hernias and his melancholy. She had baked him sweets and mended his collars. She had taken upon herself the penance of the psalms he was ordered to recite. She died just 4 years ago. The grief is a heavier weight than the house arrest. He is alone now, truly alone, save for the memories and the stubborn, burning intellect that refuses to be extinguished. There is a secret in this house. Beneath the floorboards of his mind and hidden within the physical chaos of his study lies a manuscript. The Inquisition has banned his books. They have forbidden him from publishing anything new. They believe they have silenced the voice that spoke against the order of the heavens. But they forgot that a mind like his operates on a different plane. Night after night, despite his failing eyes, despite the pain in his body, he has been dictating. He is writing his final masterpiece, the discourses and mathematical demonstrations relating to two new sciences. It is not about the planets this time, it is about the physics of the Earth, the strength of materials, the motion of falling bodies. It is the foundation of the future. The atmosphere in the room shifts. There is a tension here, a quiet thrill of subversion. He cannot publish this in Rome. He cannot publish in Florence. The text must be smuggled. It must leave the Catholic world and find haven in the Protestant North. He entrusts the pages to a visitor, a connection to the great publishing house of Elsevier in Holland. Picture the handover. It is done in hushed tones. A heavy packet of parchment, wrapped in leather, passed from the trembling hands of the blind genius into the cloak of a traveller. There are no guards in the room, but the threat hangs heavy in the air. If this is discovered, the little freedom he has left will be stripped away. The manuscript leaves the villa. It travels over the Alps, hidden in luggage, bouncing in the carriage over mountain passes, crossing borders where the Pope's writ does not run. It arrives in Leiden. The printing presses turn. The ink stains the page. The ideas that were meant to die in a Tuscan villa are multiplied by the thousands, spreading across Europe, unstoppable as the tide. Back in Arcetri, the old man listens to the wind. He does not need eyes to see the truth. He knows the book is out there. He has won. He has circumvented the censors, not with force, but with the endurance of truth. He settles deeper into his chair. The fire has burned down to embers, a soft glowing red in the darkness. His body is failing. His heart is tired, but his spirit is calm. He thinks of Kepler, the German mathematician who wrote to him years ago. Galileo had been cold to him then, dismissing Kepler's messy elliptical orbits because he loved the perfection of the circle. He realizes now that even he, the great iconoclast, was held captive by his own dogmas. We are all prisoners of our own perceptions, learning slowly to see the light. If you wish to leave a comment about which part of history we should explore next, please do so below. The room is very dark now. The villa is silent. The world outside continues its rotation, indifferent to the dramas of men, spinning in the vast, cold emptiness of space. The prisoner of the stars closes his eyes. He is ready to rest. He is ready to explore the final mystery. Let the image of the old man fade. Let the villa dissolve into the mists of time. There is only the night now, the same night that he watched. The same stars that look down on his telescope look down on you. They are steady. They are eternal. They are the silent witnesses to the grandeur of the human mind and the peace of the sleeping world. The night sky has always been a mirror. Since the dawn of our species, we have looked up into that obsidian ocean, scattered with diamonds, and seen our own reflections. We projected our gods, our fears, and our destinies onto the canvas of the cosmos. But there was a time, not so long ago in the grand scale of history, when the sky was a prison. It was a ceiling, a perfect immutable sphere that locked us in, placing humanity at the very center of a dramatic claustrophobic stage. Tonight, we drift back to the moment that ceiling was shattered. We travel to the cobblestone streets of Italy, to the flickering candlelight of a cold study, and into the mind of a man who dared to suggest that we are not the center of everything. We journey into the life of Galileo Galilei, a man whose brilliance was matched only by his burdens, a man who found himself trapped between the infinite freedom of the stars and the rigid stone walls of earthly authority. As we settle in for this story, let your body relax. Let the weight of your own day fade away, just as the sun dips below the horizon. If you find comfort in these tales of the past, In the slow unraveling of history's greatest minds, I invite you to subscribe to our channel. It is a small gesture, but it helps us keep the lantern lit for future stories. Now, close your eyes and let us walk through the mists of Tuscany. Before he was the prisoner of the stars, Galileo was a young man caught in a different kind of trap. We often think of him as a born rebel, a man of science fighting religion, but the truth is far more human and far more tragic. As a young boy, he did not dream of telescopes. He dreamed of silence. He was a novice at the Vallombrosa Abbey, a quiet sanctuary nestled in the forests near Florence. He wore the robes of a monk. He breathed the incense of the chapel. He deeply, truly desired to join the priesthood, to lose himself in the spiritual contemplation of the divine. That the world had other plans. His father, Vincenzo, was a man of sharp intellect and sharper temper, a musician who struggled to feed his family. Vincenzo stormed into the abbey, not with prayers, but with demands. He forcibly removed his son, stripping him of the religious life he craved, and thrust him into the University of Pisa to study medicine. "There is no money in prayer," one can imagine him saying. "You will be a doctor." It is ironic, is it not? The man who would one day be accused of heresy began his life wanting nothing more than to serve God. And yet, it was his father's influence that planted the seeds of the revolution to come. Vincenzo was a music theorist, a man who did not trust ancient books. He performed experiments on the tension of lute strings. He showed young Galileo that if you stretched a string to change its pitch, the math had to align with the physical reality, not the other way around. He taught his son that authority, even the authority of the great Pythagoras, could be wrong if a simple experiment proved otherwise. This was the true inheritance Galileo received, not money, for he would always be poor, but a way of seeing. A way of asking the world to explain itself. Galileo was a terrible medical student. He skipped lectures to listen to geometry lessons through a door left ajar. He was captivated not by the anatomy of the body, but by the anatomy of shapes. He left the university without a degree, a dropout with a brilliant mind and empty pockets. And here, the weight of the real world pressed down on him. When his father died, Galileo, the eldest son, inherited the responsibility of the family. He had sisters who needed dowries, massive sums of money required to secure them husbands, and a younger brother, Michelangelo, who was a musician of great talent and absolutely no financial sense. It is easy to romanticize the life of a genius, to imagine them working in a vacuum of pure thought. But Galileo's life was a constant hustle. He was desperate for money. He was terrified of debt. This desperation fueled his ambition. He needed a position. He needed a patron. He needed the world to notice him. If you are enjoying this slow descent into the past, please take a moment to like this video. It serves as a marker on your journey, a breadcrumb dropped in the forest of history. The year is 1609. Galileo is 45 years old. He hears rumours of a device from Holland, a spyglass that makes distant objects appear near. He does not wait to buy one. He figures out the optics himself. His hands, stained with glass dust, grind lenses with an obsessiveness that borders on mania. He improves the design, boosting the magnification to 8 times, then 20, then 30. He takes this instrument, this tube of leather and wood, and he does something no one else had thought to do. He does not look at ships on the horizon, he tilts it upward. Imagine that moment. The silence of the Italian night. The cold air biting at his cheeks. He puts his eye to the glass and looks at the moon. For thousands of years, Aristotle had taught that the heavens were perfect. The moon was a smooth, crystalline sphere, a pearl of divinity. But through Galileo's glass, the moon was ruined. It was not a pearl. It was a rock. It was scarred. It had mountains, jagged and towering. It had valleys, deep and shadowed. It was a world, just like the earth. If the moon was a corrupt, imperfect rock, then the boundary between the heavens and the earth was a lie. The universe was made of the same stuff as the ground beneath his feet. He kept watching. He saw 4 tiny stars dancing around Jupiter. Night after night he plotted their positions. They were moons. They were orbiting Jupiter, not the Earth. It was undeniable proof that not everything in the universe revolved around us. He named them the Medicean stars, a brilliant stroke of marketing to flatter the Grand Duke of Tuscany, Cosimo de' Medici. It worked. He secured a position at court. He secured a salary. He finally paid his sister's dowries. But in securing his rise, he had also secured the attention of the Roman Inquisition. The tragedy of Galileo is not that he hated the Church. It is that he loved it too much. He believed that the Bible was true, but that nature was also a book written by God. He famously said, "The Bible shows the way to go to heaven, not the way the heavens go." He wanted to save the Church from the embarrassment of clinging to a wrong idea, but pride is a dangerous thing. In 1632 he published his great work, the Dialogue concerning the 2 chief world systems. It was a masterpiece of wit and sarcasm. But he made a fatal error. He took the arguments of his old friend Pope Urban VIII and put them in the mouth of a character named Simplicio, the simpleton. The Pope was humiliated. The friendship was shattered. The machinery of the Inquisition began to turn. We arrive now at the trial. The old man, nearly 70, kneeling on the stone floor. He is terrified. He is not a martyr who wants to burn. He is a man who wants to survive. He recants. He says the words they want him to hear. He claims he does not believe the earth moves. Legend says that as he stood up, he muttered, "Eppur si muove," and yet it moves. Whether he said it or not, the truth remained. The earth continued to spin, indifferent to the decrees of men. His sentence was house arrest. He was banished to a villa in Arcetri, known as Il Gioiello, the jewel. It sounds beautiful, but it was a cage. He was forbidden from teaching. His books were banned, and then the darkness truly came. The eyes that had seen the craters of the moon, the phases of Venus, and the rings of Saturn slowly failed him. Galileo went completely blind. "This universe," he wrote, "which I have expanded 1,000 times, has now shrunk to the narrow confines of my own body. Yet, in this midnight of the soul, there was a light. It did not come from a star, but from a woman, his daughter Virginia. Because she was illegitimate, Galileo deemed her unmarriageable and placed her in a convent where she became Sister Maria Celeste. They never saw each other during his imprisonment, but their souls were entwined. She was his confidant, his nurse, his scribe. She sent him herbal remedies for his hernia and his anxiety. She took upon herself the penance of his prayers. She was the anchor that kept him from drifting into the abyss of despair. With her encouragement, the blind old man did the impossible. He dictated his final masterpiece, The 2 New Sciences, a book that laid the foundation for modern physics. He smuggled the manuscript out of Italy, hidden in a doublet, all the way to Holland, defying the Inquisition one last time. In 1634, Sister Maria Celeste died. Her death broke him more than the trial ever did. He lingered for another 8 years, a prisoner in the dark, listening to the wind in the cypress trees, feeling the rotation of the earth in his bones. When he died, the Church refused him a proper burial. But time, like the orbits of the planets, has a way of circling back to the truth. A century later, his body was moved to a grand tomb. During the move, zealous admirers cut off 3 of his fingers and a tooth, keeping them as secular relics. Today, if you go to the Museo Galileo in Florence, you can see one of those fingers. It is his middle finger. It stands upright in a glass egg, encased in gold and crystal. It points eternally upward, toward the sky he loved, toward the Rome that silenced him, a final silent gesture of defiance from the man who saw the truth. As we leave the villa in Arcetri, the image of the blind astronomer fades into the velvet night. The struggle is over. The silence returns. The stars that he mapped are watching over you now. They are steady. They are patient. They do not judge. They only burn. If you have a thought to share about the resilience of the human spirit, or perhaps which figure of history we should visit next, please leave a comment below. We read them all as we prepare the next chapter. Now, let the darkness of your own room be a comfort, not a prison. You are safe. The earth holds you. The gravity that Galileo studied pulls you gently down into the mattress. There is no need to calculate, no need to prove, no need to fight. There is only the slow, rhythmic turning of the world. Let go of the day. Let go of the light. Drift into the vast, quiet space of sleep. The stars will be there when you wake. Good night.